Hello and welcome back to episode 2. We made it to episode 2 of Kyle's Meltdown Time. I made a kind of agreement with myself that if 10 people listened, then I would continue on. So I'm quite excited. I got some really great feedback from some friends and also a really great shout out from someone who I really, really respect, which is Christian Hull. So yeah, basically the feedback is that I did jump around a little bit in the first episode, which I knew was going to be the case, but it was my first try, so that's going to hopefully improve as we go along. One thing that was put to me, which I absolutely know that is something that I need to work on in general, is that I did put myself down quite a bit during that. Saying that no one's going to listen. I think I do the same on my YouTube videos where I kind of think no one's going to watch. So I'm going to try very hard to not do that. So that's going to be a challenge in itself. So the way I want to structure today is just a quick update on how I'm going. And then I really want to get stuck into talking about borderline personality disorder, because that is kind of the epicenter of my mental health issues. My depression and anxiety are intrinsically linked to borderline personality, and so that's the topic that I want to explore today. So, update on how I'm feeling. It's actually been a rough couple of weeks. I wish I had have been able to get this done a little sooner, but there's been a few complications. So I think I may have mentioned a new medication that was added into the mix, and funnily enough, it produced some really serious side effects. So all my joints were sore. There was a few mornings ago before I spoke to my doctor that I physically couldn't get out of bed. Every joint was kind of locked and really painful. I couldn't move my neck or head. So we've kind of halved the dose of that. And obviously I'm feeling a little frustrated because it looks as though we're going to need to start again. So that means going through the reduction of this one, then looking at adding in something else, which will then produce its own side effects because you feel more anxious and depressed before things get better. So hopefully that starts to work. Just to give you an idea, I currently take 11 tablets a day, which for anyone is a huge amount of medication going into your body. So medication is something that my doctor and I are working really hard on to find the right mix, and try and reduce the amount of medication going in. I'm absolutely not one of those people who shies away. If I have to take 25 tablets a day for things to be okay, I will. But, obviously everything comes with a price, and they all come with their certain side effects. So, yeah, so it's been an interesting couple of weeks of mood changes, going from depression to anxiety, and then into distress levels, which have been a little bit scary at times. So that's the reason I wanted to talk about borderline personality disorder. And from now on, I'm going to refer to it as BPD because it's just annoying to say borderline personality disorder all the time. And we all know that mental health love a good acronym. So BPD it is for today. So I want to start with a quote that is from absolutely the leading expert in BPD in the world, Marsha Lynham, who is a sufferer herself and who's developed an amazing strategy for the treatment of BPD. So to give you an idea, this really resonated with me when I read it because it's just, really kind of hit the nail on the head. So the quote is that borderline individuals are the psychological equivalent of third-degree burn patients. They simply have, so to speak, no emotional skin. Even the slightest touch or movement can create immense suffering. So that means that, in the slightest terms. It's basically I might feel something that someone else feels on a scale of 1 to 10. They experience something and they experience a distress level of 4. Mine would be a 9 or a 10 for the same situation. So things like rejection, lots of different emotions. I was rejected by my best friend of 17 years. They decided they want nothing to do with me a couple of years ago. And for me, that was like a death. It felt I couldn't bring the emotion down a level. It just was skyrocketing out. I wasn't able to deal with it. It felt too painful. Rejection is one of my very big triggers. So BPD itself is absolutely one of the least understood and definitely one of the most stigmatized mental health issues. It's an extremely complex illness, and in truth, a lot of years of no treatment can go by, or you can be incorrectly diagnosed with bipolar because they do share similar kind of aspects on the scale. So some people who are sufferers of BPD are actually taking medication for bipolar and being treated with psychodynamic therapy with bipolar, and that's not going to hit the mark, obviously. So for a bipolar patient, they need a specific form of treatment, as does someone who suffers with BPD. So it's definitely the stigma that attached to it. That's one thing I want to talk about, and I'm sure if anyone's listening out there that has BPD or any mental health issue, and you've experienced the receiving end of the stigma of mental health, it's quite a crushing blow. So there are a lot of doctors, there's a lot of psychiatrists out there that actually won't treat someone who has already been diagnosed with BPD. They are a high suicide risk. 1 in 5 males complete suicide, so it's a fairly scary statistic. And so there's a lot of doctors and psychiatrists, psychologists who shy away from treating someone with BPD because of the complexities of the illness. And historically, people with BPD have been seen as manipulative, bad people. And, like anything, like any mental health issue or many behavioral issue, there's a sliding scale. There's the extreme end of things, and there's the middle range, and then there's a low range. So it's not a one-size-fits-all illness, absolutely. So a lot of years for me went by without being diagnosed or treated for BPD. So, I'm now 38 years old, and I was only diagnosed 3 years ago. So that means I went through, a good 15 years of, or nearly, close to 20 years of suffering and not understanding why I didn't fit in the world, why I felt like I was always an outsider looking in. I didn't feel like I fitted into any sort of community, and that created a tough life, and I had to build my own resilience and my own tactics of dealing with it without understanding what was actually going on. So, having a successful career meant that I had to put on this front of, someone who was happy and joking, and a lot of people that I know that are close to me that worked with me for a long time, eventually, knew that there was something going on. But for the most part, I was able to cover it pretty well for most of the time. So the cracks started to show when I was around 28. I started to experience some really severe symptoms of depression and self-harm behaviours and suicidal thoughts. So I was actually living in Scotland at the time, and it was a tough time because, again, I didn't know what was going on. So thus began the never-ending cycle of GPs visits. I was in Scotland, I lived in Edinburgh, and I would literally be at the doctor's every couple of days or every week. Sometimes the doctor that I'd seen in 3 times in the last week would act or pretend, seem like they didn't even know who I was. And one particular time I remember presenting really distressed, and I was kind of begging for help, and he suggested that I join the gym. So I walked out the door and I fell on the ground, and I was just hysterical. I was so distressed because I thought, I'm putting myself at this person's mercy, and what's going on? They're telling me to join the gym. I bet you $1 million that nearly every mental health patient has been told. Obviously, we know exercise is a good thing. I'm not saying that at all. But as a solution to your mental health problem, particularly something as complex as BPD or severe depression and anxiety, it's not as easy as just popping to the gym and suddenly everything gets better. Exercise does help, and I do not want to send a message that I'm not advocating for exercise as part of your self-care routine. It absolutely should be. But there's a lot more to it than that, obviously. So basically what I did is I started to read a lot about different mental health issues because I knew I needed to kind of take ownership of things and think about it myself. So I started to research, and I started to think that that's where I fit in to BPD. And to be honest, it was fairly grim at the time. So I made the decision to move back to Australia, and there are so many times in my story that I wish I could go back and tell myself, Kyle, you need to go to therapy, proper psychotherapy. I guess that is the benefit and the hindsight of a hell of a lot of incompetent doctors. Thankfully, I found one when I moved to Sydney, and he referred me to a psychiatrist who I worked with for the next 7 years. There are times where I was seeing my doctor 2 times a week, so that was very hard to juggle. Why was I leaving work all the time? But it was important. It was crucial that I needed that level of psychotherapy, and he was a fantastic doctor because he did not diagnose me with BPD for probably 3 years that we talked. And every Tuesday and Friday. And the reason for that is that it's a serious diagnosis. It's one of the most serious mental health conditions you can have. And so he wasn't the type of doctor that just, met me for 45 minutes, diagnosed me, referred me back to my GP with a box of tablets and hope that things get better. So there are some criteria that you need to meet, unfortunately, to be properly diagnosed of BPD, and I really just want to go quickly through what they are. So, number one is the frantic efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment. So that's rejection. So the word frantic really kind of highlights that. It is a desperate scramble to constantly worry that you're going to be rejected by the people close to you. And unfortunately, through my life, that has actually happened. So, whether it was part of my illness that led to it, there were certain elements of that, definitely. There was also just outright rejection, by family members and relationships and friends. So those rejections really hit hard, and they cause a huge devastation to me because I see those almost as like a death, and I grieve accordingly. So it's definitely frantic is the word to describe it. So number 2 is a pattern of unstable and intense interpersonal relationships, and that's characterized by alternating between extremes of idealization and devaluation. So that's thinking a little black and white. So there's a book that I'm reading at the moment that says it perfectly, is I hate you, don't leave me. So it's putting someone on a pedestal, and they're either the best person in the world, the most important person of the or they're the worst person. So that can happen on a different sliding scale again to people. I definitely put my best friend on a pedestal. I looked up to her for 17 years, and it was a crushing blow when she walked away from the friendship. So again, with romantic relationships, I definitely put the person on a pedestal, and that includes thinking that they're better than I am. So anyway, third is identity disturbance. So it's a marked and persistently unstable self-image or sense of self. And that's what I was referring to about not fitting in the world. It's a lot of people have that real sense of self, and they have purpose. They know where they fit in. They're determined. They're passionate. Whereas a lot of sufferers of BPD scramble from one thing to the next. So always looking for the next thing to try and fit into. So for me, that's been a really recurring theme. I didn't feel like I fitted into the gay community. I didn't feel like I fitted in at work, even though other people wouldn't agree with that, but that's how I felt. And I always describe it as being kind of on the edge of the cliff, looking over at people, at the world, and not being part of it, constantly being on the outside, trying to force your way or break your way through and fit in somewhere. So the fourth one is impulsivity in at least two areas that are potentially self-damaging. So that can include lots of things. To be honest, this include excessive spending, dangerous sex or impulsive sex, substance abuse, which is very, very common, reckless driving, binge eating. There's a lot of things that fall into self-damaging behaviours, and that can, again, it's a sliding scale for people who experience that, because there's not everyone that experiences the same sorts of things. For me, it's been a bit of everything. I don't recklessly drive, thank God, but there are other things which I'll get into later. So number 5 is the recurrent and suicidal behaviour, gestures, threats, or self-mutilating behaviour. So that's where self-harm comes into it. The majority of BPD patients who are admitted have definitely either attempted suicide or self-harmed at some point in their life. So number 6 is the affective instability due to a marked reactivity of mood. So it's a kind of sense of dysphoria or irritability and anxiety lasting a few hours and sometimes more than a few days. So mood is something that I still struggle with, that my mood can go from a 5 to a 1 in an hour for no reason. I try to identify triggers that cause things, but it's very frustrating when you're trying so hard to get well and you wake up one morning and you just feel absolutely terrible for no absolute reason. So it's a tough one. Number 7 is chronic feelings of emptiness. I think that explains itself. Number 8, inappropriate intense anger or difficulty controlling anger. So frequent displays of temper, constant anger, recurring physical fights. So where that falls in for me is I direct that anger inwards. I'm not the sort of person that gets into fights. I don't scream and yell at people, although I do have more of an anger issue now. Things, really get to me and make me really angry, and I need to try and work out how to lessen that. But definitely, people can display that inwards or outwards, and I display it very inwards. So number 9, transient stress-related paranoid ideation or severe dissociative symptoms. So that again explains itself. Disassociation is something that's extremely hard to describe because the only probably small way I could put it is that you feel like someone else is driving the car. So you're not in the driver's seat, you're kind of looking above and someone else is in charge of things. That's kind of the feeling that I get. So I qualify for all 9 of the criteria, which is awesome. I tend to overachieve, which is great. So you really only need to qualify for 5 of them. But I qualify for all 9, which, lucky me. So yeah, I'm called what's called a quiet borderline, which I actually agree sounds super creepy. What it actually means is that the anger and rage aspects of BPD are all directed inwards at me. So I constantly berate myself for every little thing, and over time I started to display more and more of those symptoms. So actually couldn't tell you the amount of times I've been in hospital now for things. It feels like a bit of a fog and I can't really properly put things in order. It's very chaotic in my mind at times. So that's kind of sitting and trying not to explode. It's a very lonely disease as well. The negative stigma, I shy away from people telling people that I have it, and although I'm broadcasting it to the world, usually it's actually medical professionals that I shy away from telling that I have it. If I have a hospital stay, I definitely do not tell them that I have BPD because I've been treated so poorly in mental health in hospitals. Talked about like I'm not there. I could, have a whole episode on that. I'm sure a lot of mental health patients, whether it's just presenting highly depressed or highly anxious, there's a very marked difference in the way that you're treated in regards to your mental health as opposed to when you're presenting with a physical symptom. So it's a lonely disease because it isolates. There's a lot of self-isolation, which is self-imposed. I've lost a lot of friends, very, very close friends, that simply, just kind of gave up, which I don't want to make that sound like I'm blaming them, but they did, and it's lonely. So, having relationships and relationships in general is part of the intricacies of BPD, and why people struggle so much with relationships is due to the symptoms of BPD. So, granted, in all people's defense, a lot of people just can't put up with that and continue to have a relationship or a friendship or whatever it may be with someone who struggles so badly with controlling their emotions and mood. So, yeah, I think, that's kind of my take on what BPD is for me. It's something that I'll talk about more because it's really at the epicenter of my illness. It has led me to, there's been times where I've thought to myself, I can't run forever. This illness will catch up with me eventually and it'll overwhelm me and that'll be it. And that's a really abstract feeling because it's always in the back of my mind that, I'm running, trying so hard, trying to do my blog to help people, to trying to do this podcast to help people. I'm trying as many things as I possibly can to make some money, all sorts of different things, but it's something that I struggle with on a daily basis. It's not something that just pops up now and again. It certainly, lies underneath every day. So my mood can go from feeling inspired, writing a blog article that might have been published, and that pride lasts for about 5 minutes before I crash into negative feelings of thinking I'm a failure, I can't do it again, I'm not doing well enough. I'm sure a lot of people can relate to those kind of feelings. So that's my journey at the moment with BPD. I'm still working very, very hard. The one thing that I would say to anyone who's listening who thinks they maybe fall into some of those categories or is already diagnosed with BPD is that the best thing you can do is learn about the illness, because it's such an isolating illness that you feel like you're, a little alien living on another planet. That's how I always used to describe it. That I was on my own little planet and, didn't have a sense of self and a sense of my place in the world. And, if that's what you're experiencing, please go and talk to someone. I'm not a psychiatrist, so this is just my journey and my story about BPD. I hope it helps someone. Thank you for listening. Thank you so much for the support of people who have listened to the first one. This one, is a little bit longer, so apologies for that. But I think it's an important topic to cover and not rush through. So my journey is far from over, and I want to share it with you, and I hope to see you in the next one. So thank you. And also any feedback, if you want to leave any comments of things that you'd like to hear or would think that I could do better, I'm absolutely open to it. So I think that hopefully I haven't jumped around quite so much, focused on one issue. Next time we might talk about something like depression or anxiety, because again, that's a huge sliding scale of symptoms and how that affects people. So all the best to everyone out there who's struggling or who's got a loved one who's struggling with mental illness. It's tough. Keep fighting and stay strong, and I hope to see you in the next episode. Okay, take care. Bye.